Hello and welcome to a special edition of The Tigers Down Under. I'm your host as always, Alex, and with me tonight I have Brad.
Hello.
And I've also got Dan.
Hey there, everyone.
And this is a special edition of The Tigers Down Under where we'll recap the entire summer window, I guess, because it's summer in the UK, where we've had a pretty eventful window in the end, bringing both players in and also letting players go. We'll focus on the players that we've actually signed and look at their strengths and what they can actually add to the team. But I guess we can also touch on the players that they're replacing in the process. So I thought the best place to start was with the Chelsea boys, since all three of them have been brought in as loanees and they're all defenders. And obviously Ola Aina was the first senior signing we made of the summer, but quickly followed by Michael Hector, and then right at the very end we also signed Tamori, who can play anywhere across the back four. I'll start with you, Brad, and obviously it was pretty important to get some defensive reinforcements in, but how do you think these three will go, and what have you made of Hector and Aina so far?
I think we knew early doors we were going to end up getting a few Chelsea players, which was always, I suppose, the shining light of having Slutsky on board. But probably the fact that he's actually delivered on that is probably what's most exciting. I mean, if these guys are good enough to either be knocking near the first team at Chelsea or at least part of their setup, then you'd assume that they're going to be players that at this level should be able to stamp themselves, and these should be players who have something to prove too. The fact that they've agreed to come means that they want to stand out. I certainly I like the look of Hector, and certainly like the fact that he looks like he's a sizable guy who doesn't mind throwing his body around. The other guys, it's a bit sort of unknown yet, but I do see the fact that these guys obviously at some stage at least train together before they join us. And Slutsky's obviously got one eye on becoming a long-standing English manager or Premier League manager at some stage, that he might even learn off these players just as much as they might learn off him.
And I guess it's a positive to see that Hector and Aina have both been nominated for our Player of the Month already, so they've had a great impact coming into the side. And I agree, Hector especially, I was quite excited for us to land him, and he's certainly not proven me wrong with the way he's started. And we really needed a strong centre-back to couple with Dawson in defence, because that was at least initially the area that we were most deficient in once Davies and Bruce were released from the club, and then Maguire left shortly afterwards to go to Leicester. Having just Dawson on the books was a bit concerning. Dan, what have you made of the three signings? I suppose Aina started a bit inconsistently in his first few games, but he's sort of learning his way and developing into a decent right back, and Hector, as we've already said, has been a pretty outstanding centre back for us.
Yeah, you guys have pretty spot on with your assessment so far. I would say, for the first couple of games, I would say that both Aina and Hector were a little bit inconsistent, but the same could be said about everyone in the team for those first couple of games. We were still getting used to the way that Slutsky wanted to play and used to the players around us, but those players, the couple from Chelsea and everyone as a unit, we've really been building cohesively and just growing and growing. And Hector has been outstanding there in the backs, which was interesting because Mazuch came on loan and we trialled him, and he had a couple of really good games in the pre-season, and you thought, oh well, here's a man who's going to come in next to Dawson. They seem to have it worked out really quickly and have a good understanding, and then Hector's got a chance, and he's just blown them out of the water, really.
Yeah, it was quite a surprising one because, as you say, Mazuk came in on trial in pre-season, and that kind of came out of the blue because we hadn't really heard a whole lot about it. And from all reports, he had quite a successful trial with us, which is, of course, why we signed him on a deal after that. He's sort of... I have a feeling he's actually injured at the moment. I saw something about him being out for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think he hurt his knee or his ankle in the last game.
Right.
At the end of the game against Bolton or something like that. I don't think it was too serious. He should be close to back after the international break.
Because I guess the benefit with Tamori coming in is Tamori can play anywhere across the back four, so he's a good depth player to have, as we definitely needed an extra centre back. But what have you? I mean, I guess we can cover off here the three players who were essentially free agents in Fraser Campbell, Sebastian Larsson, and also Mazouk coming in. I guess you would say as depth players. Campbell obviously has been starting a few games initially up top with Hernandez, and then after Hernandez's injury has almost become our main striker for a few games before his own injury. But they've all sort of brought a different element to the team. Obviously Campbell the biggest story with his previous history at the club. But Brad, I guess it's good to have those sorts of players come in as depth, even if they're not the most flashy signings. They're good bodies to have in the building.
Yeah, look, and obviously Campbell, I think we've touched on before, we know what we're getting there, especially at this level. I think Larsson, his age, obviously is probably the only reason why he's not in demand in a lot of different places. But as most of us know, this season's going to be a long season, and having someone who's played, hundreds of games at the top level, or at least at championship level, anchoring your midfield is going to make a big difference. And I personally think the last game that we saw against Bolton, he showed that level of composure that's going to get us through 30 games this year. Probably almost sort of like Huddleston once was. But I don't know, it's almost sort of like Larsson just feels like he could slot straight in. And probably, the thing that we looked at last year was, we started the year with effectively 12 outfield players, and this year was looking like being the same. But now we've actually got a squad that is pretty decent in size, but also pretty adaptable. There's a lot of guys that can play in a lot of different positions, and that's probably what we're going to need this year more than other years.
Yeah, one thing I'd heard about Slutsky, which I thought was interesting, was that he likes having players who can play in at least two positions, so it gives him that extra flexibility, and you can see that with his signings. I mean, even starting with Aina being able to play at right back or left back. You look at Hector, even, who can play centre back or central midfield. Larsson can play wide or central midfield. There's quite a few players who are quite flexible and can really bring a bit of variety and balance to the team. Dan, what did you make of these signings? I know we've sort of already touched on Larsson and Campbell before, but they do sort of just bring that bit of extra depth and experience to the team, because I guess the most notable factor of our signings for the large part has been their age and how young they are. So having Larsson and Campbell in particular, who are both the other side of 25 to most of our signings, it's a good thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. As Brad mentioned, this is a long season in the championship, and we do have a very young squad for the majority, and to pick up two guys of Campbell and Larsson's caliber on a free, between them, it's probably 500 or 600 games in England. And that's a lot of experience to be able to pass down to the players around them, and that's going to be invaluable throughout the season, even if, as you say, they may end up just mostly as depth as the backups and not as regular starters. But I think they could turn out to be some very shrewd signings for us this season.
And I guess at the other end of the spectrum, in terms of experience and age, we signed Kevin Stewart from Liverpool, who disappointingly hasn't been able to get on the pitch a whole heap because of an ankle injury, which sounds as if it's one that he's experienced trouble with in the past. I know he was recalled from a loan last year with a bad ankle injury, so it sounds like it could be that one that's flared up again. Signed for $4 million, but there's talk of it rising to $8 million depending on how he goes. It was one that sort of surprised me at the time, because it just seemed a lot of... At the time, we weren't spending money on anyone. To then be going out and spending $4 million on someone with so little experience just seemed a bit odd to me. And I guess he hasn't really been able to have the game time to prove me wrong. But Dan, what did you make of this signing? And do you see it as a good signing? Do you see it as a signing for the future? Or what do you make of it?
I'm still really undecided on Kevin Stewart, and part of that is because I haven't had an opportunity to see him play. Part of it is I keep getting it's been a couple of players that we've had like this where we've signed and then they've had these injuries that seem to maybe have been ongoing injuries, and you go, well, is this something that we like they went through the medical and they did all the and that we knew about and then signed, and something that's come to bite us, or something that went unnoticed in the medical and has then flared up afterwards. And that's the question I sometimes find myself asking, but I think I'm being perhaps a little bit cynical about it all. But I think it's a hard one to judge because, as has been mentioned, I think we've seen him 10 minutes this season.
Yeah, against QPR, wasn't it?
Yeah. So I find that one him. I haven't looked at anything up on him, and I might probably struggle to do so. I think most of his games would have been in the youth for Liverpool. So or possibly some clips from being out on loan, but yeah, I don't really have a strong opinion one way or the other on him at the moment.
Well, it's quite funny because from all reports, it sounds as if he played quite well for the under-23s against us last season. So there's a few players that we'll go on and to discuss who seems as if we've signed because they've managed to score goals against us this season. But he'd almost fit that trend as well, where he's a player who played quite well against us, and that kind of serves as our scouting of him. Brad, what do you make of the signing, and do you see it as a signing that we needed? And obviously, Huddleston leaving the club, we were sort of lacking in those strong defensive midfielders who can break up an attack and reset, obviously losing Livermore in January as well.
Yeah, look, and it's funny you mentioned that about players that score against us. When you said that, I had flashbacks of Peter Halmosian coming over from Plymouth because he looked really good against us, and then we signed him and he was absolute rubbish. But I think the deal with Stewart, and obviously there's no shortage of Anfield experts out there that are happy to tell me that he was such a good player and they thought they got a bargain, because I think Liverpool might have even got him on a free, I think. I know he's at a big club.
I think they might have got him from Spurs, yeah.
Right, okay. So there was a bit of excitement from some of the Liverpool fans that I know of, that when we got him, they said, "Oh, well, you've got a bargain. He's a Liverpool player. He should be in the squad." So, I mean, look, the only thing about it, obviously, is it just sounds like a whole repeat of Snodgrass without maybe the seriousness. I think it was QPR that Snodgrass did his kneecap in the first game, and I think Stewart probably lasted about as long. So I hope, I would like to think that if you're going to shell out $4 million, I think it was, did we pay 4.5,
I think it
something?
was 4, yeah.
Yeah, for him, then obviously we know the alums are as tight as with money. So the fact that they actually paid $4 million for someone means it must have been a pretty compelling decision. And the only thing that I probably need to sort of expand on there is I'm a bit worried if that was just a sole knee jerk based on selling Huddleston and the other exits we had. So I think that if we can get him fit, he should be by rights a standout for us.
Would hope so. I mean, the other thing that it sort of reminds me of, though, is signing Mason last summer, and it's not a discredit to Mason that he didn't really leave a mark, but just from the pure fact that we spent $13 million on Mason, another central midfielder, we seem to have this habit of spending quite a lot of money on a position that I suppose it's one of those positions, sort of like a centre-back as well, where they're not very flashy positions, and you don't necessarily need to shell out as much money to get someone who can do a competent job, and that sometimes the money's better invested in your more creative attacking players, where you can't really skimp out on paying a decent fee to get a good player in.
Exactly right, mate.
Yeah.
And that's probably the nail that hit it there, is that when you look that we picked Larson up on a free, we could have maybe picked up a couple of different Larson-type midfielders and spent some money on a striker.
Well, Joe Ledley from Crystal Palace, who got released, is available on a free, and I think he's still available on a free. And I think as a central midfielder, he could have done quite a good job as well. So, yeah, you're right. I think there are certainly players out there who are free or close to free who could do a job. So it remains to be seen. He could come into the team and do an outstanding job and be captain within a couple of years, sort of in the way that Clucas developed and evolved over just 2 seasons for us. So it's still very early days, and fingers crossed he comes good for us. But Speaking of Glucas, who was sold to Swansea, we were able to acquire a left back about 3 or 4 games into the season after we were crying out for it since the first game. We managed to get a left back from Swansea as part of the deal, Stephen Kingsley from Swansea, who's pretty highly rated from them, and as Slutsky says, it follows in our tradition, started at least by Andy Robertson, of having a Scottish left back. I've got to admit, he's not one that I've seen a whole lot of, but the fact that he played, over 10 or over a dozen Premier League games for Swansea last season does bode well. It's not as if he was some youth player that we've picked up. But Brad, just how important was it for us to get a specialist left back into the squad?
It was vital. We all saw that when Robertson came in, even just as a defensive option, we need one. But probably the other thing as well is that when I'd heard that Kingsley was coming and I talked to a couple of Swansea guys, they actually thought he was a centre-back. So
shows how much he's made a mark in their team, I guess.
That's right. But the other thing I thought of that's probably positive is that, again, it's another guy that's in that sort of, under 25, under 26 type bracket that's got a point to prove.
Yeah.
And these guys are all, I think it's everyone we've brought in, other than, say, Fraser Campbell and obviously Larson. I think all of these guys are young players who should have a point to prove, really, because they're either going to be, this is their last chance at a decent level, or they're at a big club and looking for something more permanent. So I actually like the sounds of Kingsley from what I've heard. Of the guys that I've talked to, although they said he was a centre-back, said that he's still rated as a decent player. But and probably did say that if Swansea were in the same position as us, where they've been relegated, he wouldn't be going anywhere.
Well, that's always good to hear. Dan, what did you make of the signing, and do you think he's sort of a suitable replacement for Robertson, at least at this level?
Look, to have a specialist left back, just relieved that we did finally manage to actually get one, because it seemed to be edging closer and closer to that deadline, and we didn't seem to be making any progress on that. But and like, this is not to, no offense to Clark and not to slate him, because he's done a marvelous job to start the season, but he's not a left back.
Yeah. And
you can see that at times. There are against Wolves particularly, he got caught out on a number of occasions, and it's just the little positional things that, if you've, obviously Kingsley's been playing as a left back for a lot longer, and so he should be able to slot in and do, and he'll just understand that position a lot better, hopefully. And I think, like, it has to be a smart signing, because we needed a left back, and we've got one. It just depends on how good he can be for us. And as you said, like, he played in the Premier League last year. He got a number of games, like he got in double-figure games in the season. So it wasn't like he wasn't doing the job for Swansea last season, because if he wasn't doing the job then they would have put someone else in there. I think he's another young player who has the potential to do very well for us this year.
And then we're on to the players that it looks as if we've signed based on the fact that they've managed to score goals against us in recent seasons. We had Jon Toral from Arsenal, who, by all reports from Arsenal supporters, was a bit of a coup for us to sign, and it also sounds like we've snatched him out from under Derby's nose, which is always satisfying to do given who they've pinched off us this season. He scored a goal for us, the winning goal for Birmingham a couple of seasons back, in a game that I can't remember too much about in terms of his performance, the goal itself being a bit fluky in the sense it caught a bit of a deflection and rolled into the bottom of the net. But he was signed from Barcelona at the same time as Hector Bellerin, and went to Arsenal in the same sort of expectations as a long-term Santi Cazorla replacement. And so Arsenal fans are a bit perturbed when Cazorla got injured last season or the season before, and this guy wasn't even in or around the squad, getting a bit frustrated given the fact that he'd had these good loans out in the Championship at Brentford and Birmingham. that he wasn't getting a chance in the Arsenal team. So I think they were also a bit annoyed at the fact that he's actually been sold to us this window, which of course bodes well that he actually does have a bit of potential and a bit of something about him. And he's young. He's like the others. He's quite young. He's signed on a 3-year deal. So if he can replicate the form that he's shown in his last 2 championship spells, where he's scored quite a few goals, including a hat-trick for Brentford, I believe, he may do quite well for us. So, Dan, what do you make of this signing? And he gives us a pretty decent attacking midfield option.
Yeah, look, I to start with, I think we might have read the same article on Toro, just from some of the things you said. But yeah, no, I think because I read an article where basically it was a Arsenal fan group that had written it, and they was just basically said like he should be there, and we don't understand why he's not. And this has to be the year that he gets into the squad, and then you know, a few days later we signed him. So I can only imagine that the person who had written that article wouldn't be very pleased. But no, like it was mentioned before when we were talking about what sort of players we needed and could have spent money on, and you're spending money on a creative player. This should never really be a bad thing, especially, you know, young player, you know, signed by Arsenal from Barcelona, you know, in the same sort of breath as Bellerin. Like, he's obviously got some quality about him, and whether it's just bad luck by him or some other set of unfortunate circumstances that he never made it into the Arsenal team, I'm looking forward to seeing him in action, and I think he's going to be probably one of the better signings, and he should really light it up for us and be able to assist the guys up front, whether that's going to be Campbell or Diamande or Dicko, as to score some goals for us.
Absolutely. And Brad, do you think... I mean, we've got a lot of central midfielders in the squad now. Obviously, Torrell can also play out wide, but Larson, Torrell, Irvine, who we'll go on to talk about in a second, Evandro, Henriksen, Mason, if he does make it back at all this season, and Myler, of course. Do you think we've sort of overstocked in central midfield, or do you think signings like Torrell are good signings for that flexibility out wide, as well as giving us, you know, variety in the middle depending on who we're coming up against?
Yeah, look, I think probably the thing that we have got is obviously an abundance of midfielders, but other than Torrell coming in and maybe looking at what Larson can create and so on, we haven't got that, you know, attacking midfielder who can replace a striker. And that's probably why I think this Torrell signing could be an absolute stroke of genius. I don't know how we've got him, because the understanding is that nearly every championship club was after him. And the rumour amongst some of the Arsenal supporters is the reason why he's not on the book somewhere else full time is that his wages are pretty high.
Right.
And that being sent out on loan at maybe, you know, 75% contribution to wages or something like that is the whole reason why he is a consistent loanee. And the deal that he's on at Arsenal is that good, he wouldn't be able to get that matched anywhere else. But having said that, you know, I don't know enough about him other than to say that, yeah, like you said about his Birmingham experience, there's a couple of times when I've just looked up his stats. You know, I think he's played 2 whole seasons back to back in the championship at different clubs. So I mean, if he's good enough, especially at Birmingham, to be holding a spot for a massive amount of games, I think he played like 35 plus games in both seasons. He could really be someone that adds a lot of depth to a position, to be honest, that we haven't seen anyone a real out and out attacking midfielder since, well, for a long time. Someone who can actually score a goal or two. Yeah, look, that's probably right. He's actually seems to be a similar style player to Corin, if you on what you read. So yeah, I think it's long overdue that we haven't got that same type of midfielder coming in. we've got our Milers, our Masons already on the books, plus what we've signed. We really need someone who gets a free rein in under a striker's feet.
And so then another player who we've signed who scored against us this season is Dicko from Wolves, who had quite a good goal scoring record, at least in League One for Wolves, before doing I think it was his ACL, which he's now recovered from, and obviously scored the winning goal against us only a couple of weeks ago. He's another exciting signing who, if he can get up to speed, can be quite a good asset for us, where he's known for his pace and strength. I suspect he's essentially been signed as that second striker behind probably Campbell. I don't know in order of preference where Slutsky sees the order of standings, but while Hernandez is out injured for the time being, it'll be between those two, and then obviously Diomande is the third choice, I would think. Dan, what do you make of the signing of Dicko, and I guess what did you make of him in the game between us and Wolves earlier in the season? What do you think he can bring to the team?
Look, I think Dicko, much like most of the signings, have been it's been purely needs based. You know, we lost Hernandez for a long, if not the whole season, it's all but, and we needed, and then Campbell went down injured for a bit, and we needed an extra striker, but I'm glad that we didn't just sort of grab anyone. He does seem to he looks good. He looks like a good player, and he should score goals from us, especially if you can get, we've just spoken about Torrell, and if we can get him into the pitch and in that, number 10 sitting just in behind the forwards and creating some chances, particularly in addition to Grosicki's on fire at the moment, Bowen's on fire at the moment. You've got players all around that forward line who are creating opportunities and scoring goals, and if we have someone who can be the figurehead man, that central man who can just put away all those extra half chances that have been sort of missing, even though we've scored plenty so far, we've missed just as many golden chances. So I think you mentioned his pace and his strength as his two key attributes, and I think with that and with the way that we play, I think he should put us in good stead to be pushing for those promotion spots.
Brad, Dicko playing for Slutsky is probably a headline writer's dream matchup. But what did you make of the signing, and what do you think he can bring to the team?
Look, it is a pretty good headline. Dick and Sluts all in the one thing, but it's a family show, so I won't go too far past that. But look, probably the thing that impressed me, and look, to be honest, he's not a player I knew a lot about, but just looking up what he's actually done, his team, other than the injury side of it worries me a little bit from what I've read and what I've heard, but the fact that he's in a year that Wolves effectively made the playoffs or just missed out, he was the joint scorer, shows that he can do it. I don't think we've bought him along as our out and out strike option, or even a replacement for Hernandez, but more a squad striker. And I think he will chime in for some goals. And to be honest, he could end up being somewhat of a bit of a saviour because of this new free rein, especially with injuries, that he could end up being a target man. But I don't know. I'm not quite as positive as I am some of the other signings when I first saw this, which probably means he'll go on and be quite successful.
That's usually the way of it. I guess the signing that we can be the most positive about, and the one that we've left till last, is obviously the signing of Jackson Irvine from Burton. Quite funnily enough, talking about the preview for Burton's game a couple of weeks ago, we were sort of talking about the fact that it had been a while since there was an Aussie in the squad, and how it was great to see a player like Irvine doing well in the championship. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, and he's wearing amber and black. So it was a move that kind of came up quite quickly, and it was quite an exciting one to see develop. And obviously announced his signing, I think it was the day before deadline day, or a day before that, while he was already across on this side of the world preparing for the game against Japan, which didn't go so well, unfortunately. But I'll start with you, Dan, and how exciting is it to have an Australian back at the club, and what do you make of the signing?
Well, for us, As the Australian branch of the supporters group, it's great. It's outstanding. It's great to have an Australian there. Just as a general club thing, at the end of the day, whether he's Australian or he's Greek or he's Thai or whatever, it doesn't really matter as long as he can do the job. And I think, from what he did with Burton last year, and he got 10 goals for Burton last year in his first season in the championship, I believe, or was it his second last year?
First season.
Yes, from Ross County, I think, came across, and 10 goals in the championship in your first season. That's a pretty good achievement.
As what would be traditionally thought of as a central midfield role, he wasn't even brought across as an attacking midfielder or striker.
Yes, yeah, that's that too, and. In addition to what we said about him last time, I think in the preview to the Burton game, I think I might have said, or it might have been Brad, someone said that he was going to be involved in everything. And we were right.
He did, yeah.
He certainly was. And look, I think that game probably showed the best and the worst of Jackson Irvine. And that's, if you can get those, because the two fouls that he gave away to get his yellows and his red, they were just stupid. They were silly and needless. But the flip side of that, the rest of the 35 minutes that he played were great, and the goal that he scored was outstanding. But he was hit brilliantly, and it was a perler. But I think he's of the midfield signings that we've made. Torrell and Irvine are the most exciting for me, and probably of all the midfielders we've got, they probably excite me the most of the midfielders in our squad. And now that Clucas has departed, he'll do well. I thought he was doing an okay job the other night against Japan, but other people didn't think so. But each their own.
I think it's hard to judge on that performance, especially. I mean, not to sound too defensive of him off the bat, but it was a pretty disappointing performance all around from Australia, and it did seem as if the tactics might have played into the performance of a number of the players. So it'll be interesting to see once he gets back to England and starts to play a couple of games for us, how he can settle in and how he can go for us. But Brad, how do you see him developing and adapting at City?
I think he'll fit in really well. He's a gritty player. Most of the people that know the Socceroos setup know that we're trying to play this sort of somewhat, I don't even know what system it is now, Dutch system, Belgium system, whatever it is, with players that have grown up playing an Australian way, which is generally a sort of hard-edged sort of game and style. And we saw obviously in the first game against us how he plays, and his record as a player, both in the matches with the Socceroos that he's been involved in, but also in the Scottish leagues, show that he can do it in the right leagues. He'd be one of those players that, funny enough, if we actually got promoted, I think he would probably struggle big time, just because of the extra pace and that extra quality. But at this level, he's a fantastic addition to the squad, and those that sort of have seen him play at a lower level, or at least even in the championship last year, would say that he has the potential to be a star. He's just probably not that sort of 19-year-old star.
No, and it'll be interesting to see how he steps up with City, because obviously with Burton being their player of the season and top goal scorer, it's potentially easier to do in a side that doesn't have a whole lot of star quality in it. But at the same time, it'll be interesting to see if the step up with City. I mean, a good comparison is with Clucas, where you see Clucas step up from League 2 to League 1 to the Championship to even to the Premier League with us, where he could sort of raise his game as the quality around him also grew. And it'll be interesting to see if Irvine can do the same, where playing in a side battling for promotion, he's able to sort of step up his game and score even more goals and prove more productive in the side than he was at Burton.
And probably the good thing about it is, we've got an abundance of these, central to defensive midfielders. in our list now. But of all the ones that we've sort of had, Irvine's got sort of the potential to be that Ian Ashby type.
Yeah.
And I really like the fact that we can anchor that. We've had defensive midfielders in past seasons since Ash left where it's more about being a ball player and more about moving the ball up the park. We've seen how Huddleston can effectively, dance on a ball before he plays it. But I've always liked the fact that, and I think your back four like the fact that if you move the ball on reasonably quickly with real vigour, and you're a hard bastard, I think you can go a long way.
So just to round things up, I'll start with you, Dan. Obviously, at various points during the window, it looked pretty doom and gloom, but we've managed to sign a fair few players and really strengthen the squad. How do you see the squad as it's finished up in the window compared to how it started, and where do you see us sort of finishing, whether it's top 10, top 6, top 2? How do you see the squad going this season?
Not going to lie, when the season started, I was pretty concerned. I was still, I was hopeful. I was definitely hopeful, and I, kept my positive face on, and I was pretty, I was still confident that we had a good squad who could compete. But I think now, given who's left and where they were in their careers and what points and who we've managed to bring in, whether they are only on loans or permanent signings, I think we've improved the squad. I think we actually have a squad that can properly challenge now. I don't think we'll get automatic promotion, but I think we will be top 6. And I think that's fair. I think there are still teams that, whether it's just because they've been together as a whole, because we've basically brought in almost a whole new starting 11, what was 11 signings, I think. So you've brought in a whole new team into your squad. There's a lot of new players and a lot of things to work out between them all. But I think it's been good. I honestly thought deadline day was going to be a little more typical City, that we'd be scrambling more or getting more deals done in this, than were. But it was just Tamori that was announced, I think, right on the close or just after. I think actually just after the close of the window. But I'm saying that, I'm glad that it's good that most of our business that we got most of it done beforehand, that we weren't relying on that the last 5-10 minutes to be trying to push paperwork through and do it incorrectly or whatever we've had in the previous seasons. So no, I'm quite happy with how things have turned out.
And Brad, how do you see it? As Dan alluded to, probably the only deal that in a way was disappointing was that Musa wasn't able to be signed on loan from Leicester, but in some ways I suspect that was maybe not dependent on Grzycki leaving, but would have certainly been a lot easier to facilitate if Grzycki had left. And in some ways, I think, given the amount of turnover in the squad, keeping Grzycki was probably the right move, because it gets to a point where, as Dan's saying, you're essentially naming an entirely new team. So some sort of stability is probably what we're after. But what did you rate the signings as, and how do you see us going this season?
Well, look, I think the scouts have earned their money and certainly brought in a decent, basically the best way to sum it up is we're going to have a pretty good squad. What concerns me, and it's been pretty much everyone's concern since the start of this whole window, was that, whether it's been Premier League or not, other than Hernandez, we've had no real striker option. And it's great to see Bowen come up now and show, a goal scoring now. But this time last year, I know it's a different league, Snodgrass was our leading scorer, and we know what the value of someone who can score double digits goals in the championship is. We saw that when we got promoted last time. I think Hernandez scored a dozen or 13 or 14 or something like that.
I think it was like 20 in the end.
Yeah, it was 20. I think it was
right.
20.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, you're right. But that's what worries me is, even then, scoring that many goals only got us to the playoffs.
Yeah.
And this time around, we've got what I think is actually probably a stronger squad than we've had for a while. But without Hernandez, Campbell being injured, and we're relying on let's say our B team strikers. That's what worries me going into games 30-40 at the end of the season.
So where do you see? So you see us pushing for top 6, or probably not quite making it?
Look, I think. Oh, do you know what? I'm going to say that we won't make it, because then we will.
Nice bit of reverse psychology there. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Look, 6-8. I think somewhere around there. And who knows? The problem with this league is, I thought anyway, after watching the Bolton game, here I thought, okay, Bolton's a team that's going to be having something to prove and going to at least put on a fight, but they were rubbish. And they're going to, if the teams down the bottom are so weak that top 4 or 5 or 6 teams could be identified pretty early, then it could be a hard ladder to climb in the second half of the season if you're not already in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I think we've probably got a stronger squad than we have for a little while, and it's good to have that sort of depth in the squad, because I think that'll definitely be proved necessary towards the end of the season. And the one thing I'll say, I mean, I completely agree, we're kind of lacking that quality striker, but it's been great to see that there's the number of goal scorers that we've had in recent games, that Bowen's doing well, Grzycki's finding the back of the net, and we're also seeing a couple of other players chipping in with goals as well. So it'll be interesting to see, obviously, with the additions of Toral, Irvine, and a couple of others, to see whether they can also bring a bit of goal scoring now to the team. And I think we'll definitely push for that top 6 spot. I think you're right, though. I think top 2 is probably out of the question, just because we don't have that top end quality in the squad that a side like Wolves, for instance, seem to have. And Cardiff is surprisingly looking like doing quite well. So if we can make that top 6, I don't think there are that many sides better off than us in terms of squad quality. So I'd find top 6 probably the likely place we'll end up, and then who knows, playoffs can do anything. So it could end up being another pretty exciting run to Wembley, as we've experienced the last few seasons. But thanks for coming on, guys.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. Anytime.
No worries, and thank you everyone for listening in. Hopefully we've given you a bit to think about with the new signings, and a bit to look forward to with seeing how they run out in the amber and black. But we've got another week to go before our next game, so we'll be back Thursday night to preview the game against Derby, which will see us coming up against a couple of old familiar faces. So until then, come on City! You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
There's no turning back.